Hello, church. So we had a little technical flub up yesterday, and so that means we have to record tonight, which means we have to behave. There will be proof of anything that is said. That's usually my favorite thing about Monday is that I feel like I'm a little less filtered, and because then there's no proof. Well, there's just proof. So we've been in a series talking about how often we bury things and we put them away and we think of them as being completely understood or completely gone through, and so that and it's to some extent it's just how people behave. You know, do you know how to get to someone's house? You don't think of every single little turn before you say yes. You have that information in your head in an envelope. Hey, do you know how to get to someone's house? Yep. Well, if somebody were to ask you, you could go through this step by step, but you don't. It's just survival because there's not enough time in our lives to fully dissect all the information we know every time something's referenced. And I think the same is true in the Bible, that sometimes we think we've got it. We think we've got the fullness of a story, and we just sort of bury it and we put it away. And what God has been challenging me with in my own personal life, and I'm not kidding. I'm getting to preach the leftovers, like the stuff that God is just doing in my own life. Has been awesome. I mean, I find myself excited. I didn't preach obviously last weekend when Joe was here, and there's a little part of me that, man, I miss it. I miss what I'm going to learn that week, and I miss because I'm not formatting in a sermon, and I miss, like, I get excited. I'm excited to preach every weekend because God has challenged me with digging things back up and things that I thought I knew. When I take a second look, I go, wait a minute, there's so much more there. And listen, no part of me, I think as a young guy, when you feel like that you're doing something better, that somehow that matters more. The older I get, the less competitive I feel about information. The less I feel like I've got the market cornered or anything like that. I just enjoy it. And what I believe is that in times in my life where I operated under an incomplete understanding of who God was, I don't think that I was wrong. So if you're hearing things in church, if you come to church and you hear something, you go, I never understood it that way. I don't think that God is sitting back going, you dummy. I think he literally is like, he's going to get it. He's going to figure it. She's going to get it. She'll figure it out. He's patient. He's waiting. But what I love is that moment where the picture of God comes clear and all of a sudden a story in the Bible, and I'm like, oh, I think if we understand God clearly, we'll understand the Word more clearly. We'll understand worship more clearly. Everything that he instructs us to and guides us to is going to start making more sense. And instead of it being a discipline, if you better do this and you better not do that, which is impossible, we find ourselves digging further. And what else? What else is there? Okay, that's where I'm at. Context is a big thing. Because if you don't understand the context of the word, if you don't understand the context of the culture and when it was written and what was going on when things were said, then you can miss the context. And the context, hear me, the context often determines the content. So if you apply a context that is inaccurate, you will not fully grasp the content. This happens in text messages. You guys ever send a text message, but you're like, oh man, I hope that they read that with the same voice that I wrote it. I wrote it down because I don't want to miss it. But if, for instance, someone could say, hey, you want to meet up early? And the response could be, I don't care, it's whatever. But it could also be, I don't care, whatever. Same words, but see, context. Context is a big thing. You want to go? Your call. Or your call. Or your call. Just the words themselves without context, the message, the content can be changed with context. So I think this happens with the word. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to read you a story. But before I do, you have to understand that you understanding God's heart is vital. You've got to understand God's heart. You have to understand God's heart. Because in the Bible, it's a written text. It is God's written text. And the heart of God, the Holy Spirit, is guiding you to what is true. But the accuser and the enemy, he is guiding you to things that are not there. And the offense that could be found if you misinterpret it based on not knowing God. I'm going to give you a really good example here in a second, but we have to set it up. This is not the kind of verse you just cold turkey start church with, okay? Because it's super offensive. If I told my kids, don't touch the pan because the pan is hot. Parents, small children. Don't touch the pan is hot. Chances are they didn't even want to until what? Until you told them not to. Inevitably, a child touches a hot pan, they burn their hands. Now listen, there's two ways to look at the evidence, because their evidence is their hands burned. And then there's pain and there's discomfort and there's going to be healing and all this. But what if they took that and said, Dad, let me burn my hand, teach me a lesson. Dad had to be right, so he let me burn my hand so he could teach me a lesson. This is the result of Dad being mad at me. Well, that's going to breed distrust. It's going to breed fear. It's going to breed resentment. All of these things. It sounds crazy because the truth is, when I told them don't touch the pan, you guys know. You parents, you know this. If you're not a parent yet, you will. When they hurt, I hurt. So my instruction that says, don't touch the pan is, I don't want you to experience that. And so what I would hope is if they can hear my voice and if they know the context of who I am, then they'll go, this is what Dad wanted me to avoid. And actually, in a moment of pain, they can find themselves more endeared to me, and the relationship deepens because they realize my heart was, I am interested in their lives, and I care about them, and I don't want them to be hurt. But you see the context? So imagine there's an accuser in my home. Imagine that a parent, this is why it's dangerous after a divorce. People who've been through a divorce, don't turn your kids against people. Because if there was an accuser that said, this is what happens, then it would become even that much more important that they hear my voice. The role of the accuser and the role of the advocate will now take that and ramp it up exponentially by 1,000. And that is the situation that we're dealing with, because we have a heavenly Father that is interested in our lives, that loves you, that wants the best for you, that brings about law for your sake to give you a direction. But we also have an accuser that is constantly invested in you distrusting the Father. What he wants to see is that you take the information and you look at it and you come to the wrong conclusion. If you're offended with God, the role of the accuser is at play in that. So let me read you this verse. I can almost already hear the spiritual gasp that's about to take place. Mark chapter 7, verse 24, it says, from there he arose and he went away to the region of Tyre and Sidon. He entered a house, and he did not want anyone to know, yet he could not be hidden. But immediately a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician by birth. She was not Jewish. And she begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. Everybody with me on what's happening so far? Jesus walks in, doesn't want to be noticed. This lady knows who he is, comes to him, begins begging him to heal her daughter who had an unclean spirit. But she was a Gentile. She was not a Jew. And he was there in the beginning, remember, clearing a path for the Jewish people. His whole purpose when he arrived was to fulfill the prophecies, to confirm who he was, to set right theology, to set right the law, to set right the word, so that when he died, people understood what it was about, okay? So he wasn't called to the Gentiles till after the resurrection. Listen to his answer. And see, because remember, we believe that God is a loving God. We are determined through faith that faith is to say we believe that God is a loving, benevolent God. He is engaged in our lives. He doesn't look at us through judgment. He looks at us through love, equals whatever. So like a math equation, both sides of the equal sign have to be the same, right? So when you hear a story, let me challenge you. Not challenge you even, as encourage you or just something to consider. When you see God act out of character, how often do you see people then change their opinion of God? Instead of looking deeper into the circumstances, instead of looking further into what's happening, they withdraw, and because of the pain and because of the role of the accuser, they say, God couldn't be that if this is true on this side of the equal sign. So let me read you this. And he said to her, let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. But she answered him, yes, Lord, yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. And he said to her, for this statement you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter. And she went home and found the child lying in bed, and the demon had gone. Now, if I wanted to accuse our Heavenly Father to you and tell you that there are times where he's impatient, if I wanted to tell you there are times where you just got to catch him in the right mood, that if you go to Jesus at the wrong time and he's in a bad mood, that he might just snap at you, Wouldn't this be a really good verse to back that up? Because remember, we've got a lady whose child is infirmed. We've got a lady whose child has an evil spirit. She comes to him and he said, why? This is what it says. It's not right that the dogs eat before the children. Does that feel offensive to anybody else? She comes to him desperate and he says, is it right that the dogs be fed before the children? So we're going back with faith. God's a good, loving God equals this story. Now, we can't leave it at that because at a surface level, it feels like God doesn't equal what we say he does if this story is there and if this is how it was written. Don't you know there were people watching this that in hearing Jesus say this had more questions? They thought they had him figured out. They thought they had him pegged because people always want to peg everyone. That's just how we are. And yet Jesus says this, and they're like, explain that. You got to remember, context equals content. So let me just tell you a little bit of the context of where this was written. It says that he was in Tyre, and he went to Tyre, and Tyre was on the northern end of Israel, clear up on the northern end. I lived in Texas for 30 years, and one of the things you'll see in Texas is the further south that you go, the more the two cultures from the countries begin to kind of mix. You know, you got Mexico right across the border, and South Texas. Actually, South Texas really looks just more like North Mexico. The food is awesome. The music, the culture. The further south you go, the more Latin influence you get because that's what happens at a border. That's what happens at a border is there becomes sort of this gray area. So what this lady is this the far northern border of Israel, and this lady was a what's called Syro-Phoenician. It means that she was a Canaanite by birth, and she was by religion and speech, she was a Greek. She was not Jewish, so she was a foreigner. So instantly, right off the top, because she was a foreigner, she instantly had no rights where she was. She was living in a place where all of the rights that would have normally been for her had been taken away. So she had nothing going for her from her nationality. Her nationality was not playing into her benefit. But that's not all. Secondly, she was a woman. Now, this is 2018, and if the gender conversation causes you to get your hackles up, pause for a second. We're not talking about 2018. We're talking about the context in which this story was written. According to the context, when this was written, she had far less rights. She wasn't socially equal to men. She wasn't politically equal to a man. In fact, it said that when they would go to court, it took the testimony of 3 women to equal the testimony of 1 man. It was like 1950. Too far. So here's the problem. She had nothing to appeal to. This is why this is especially confusing. This story is especially confusing. Here's why. We're Americans. We're Americans. We're the 1%. We're the 1%ers. I listened to a podcast today, and the guy was laughing about how people will protest the 1% in the United States. Like, dude, that's you. So, because of that, we always have something we can appeal to. If someone steals from you, you can appeal to what? Anybody? If somebody robbed you, who would you tell? Yeah, you appeal to the law. You appeal to your rights. You have certain, according to the rights of our nation, you have certain unalienable rights. So no matter how bad it is, you've always got something that you can appeal to. Is everybody following me? This is a hard story to connect to because we have nothing in common with it. We don't live in a place where we ever are completely robbed of our rights. This lady was living in a scenario that you don't understand and that I don't understand. She had nothing to appeal to. She had nothing that would advocate for her. So if you want to know, because here's the thing, if you want to know my personal stance, they say not to preach yourself, preach Jesus, and I agree. But if you want to know my personal stance, I am 100% in favor of gender equality. 100%. Let me tell you why I believe that Jesus took the charge on this. According to the rights that she had, she was not even allowed to speak to a Jewish rabbi. Under the law, she could not speak to him. If you want to know how Jesus feels about gender equality, look at how many times he went and engaged a marginalized woman. If you want to know how Jesus feels about gender equality, look at how often he went to somebody with no representation and spoke life into their situation. It wasn't based on the law of the nationality. He's saying that he would go and he would speak to someone that had no right speaking to him. Here's what's crazy. The law, please try to, in your mind, get a picture of this. The law was against her. The law was completely against her, and yet, in typical Jesus fashion, here's what's crazy. It actually put her at an advantage. This lady, because she had no rights in her favor, she was actually at an advantage, and I can explain how. Let's look back through this again. Now, the woman was a Gentile, a Syro-Phoenician by birth, and she begged. Actually, the translation says that she continued to beg. Anybody ever known any loyal moms? Hey, listen, she had nothing going for her. This lady walked in and had to ignore every legal cue, every social cue, everything that was against her. She had to walk in and just blindly ignore it. But that's what moms do. I've heard it said that it doesn't even factor in on the bravery or cowardice scale. Moms just do whatever is required. And she's begging someone when she had no right to do so. She was continually begging, almost to the point she was pestering. Now, here's what's crazy. There were Pharisees around. This house was full. There was a lot of people. It doesn't say that they were alone. It says that she was having to expose the nature of her situation. She had to risk everything in this crowd of people to begin to engage Jesus and continue begging him. And he said to her this, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." Don't you think he could have maybe said that nicer? I mean, I'm going to explain to you what he was saying. But don't you think, okay, that just seems like that was harsh when it didn't need to be. Here we got this God of love, this benevolent, caring, loving God, and that just, okay. Again, it leaves, because remember, if we're ever tempted to be offended with the Father, you're always going to have opportunity. Because the context matters. If you can ignore the context, you can be offended by the content. Hey, man. Woo. It doesn't matter what the content is because your context matters. And if you're willing to be offended, you can be offended by anything. Anything can be, the thing that can encourage this person can offend you. That's just how offense works. What he's referencing is this. I almost feel like you can almost see this playing out because I know Jesus and I know the scripture and I know how he dealt with people. I can almost see him smiling. It's almost like you're there and you can almost just see a little glint in his eye because Jesus always knows your heart. Jesus always knows your heart. He wasn't taking a risk here. He knew that she knew. Can I say that again? He already knew that she knew. Keep in mind, there was an audience. There was people listening, and he is speaking to her. But he's not speaking to her for her benefit. He is speaking to her for the benefit of those listening. He says this, legally speaking, according to the law, what he's saying is, you know that you don't have the right to ask this, right? You know that the law of all these people say that you're not equal. You know that, according to the law, you're not even allowed to speak to me. You know that you need two of your friends saying what you're saying to equal the testimony of one. He is speaking to the inequity of the law right to her. He is exposing the inequity of the law when he asks the question, when he says, it's not right that children be fed before the dogs. What he's doing is he is painting a picture of the legal situation. You have no rights, but she already knew that. Sometimes we talked about greed a few weeks ago. And that the definition of greed is believing that everything that God brings to you is for you, for your own consumption, for your own purpose. Sometimes God says, can you hold this for me? What would happen if you went to the bank and the bank said, oh, that's our money? And you're like, well, I put it in there. Like, yeah, but everything that comes to me is for my consumption. See how dishonest that feels? But don't we do that all the time? Sometimes your story, God grabs you by the hand in your life and he walks you through something unfair. He walks you through something that you don't think that you deserve. He walks you through something that you don't think is fair, but he's not doing it to be harsh. He's doing it because someone needs to see what it's like for someone not to turn loose to Jesus. You guys couldn't possibly have understood what I just said and just sat there like that. Someone needs to observe what it's like for Jesus to bring somebody through tough times and the person not to give up. You can represent hope to someone by allowing God to tell his story through you for someone else. Anybody remember what the law brings? The law brought death. The law brought death. The problem is this. Like I said, we live in the greatest nation in the world. We live in the freest nation in the world. We live in a nation where the law at a national level, don't miss what I'm going to say here. At a national level, the law advocates for us. If someone wrongs us, we can go to the law to defend ourselves. But we're not talking about national law, we're talking about spiritual law. We live in a nation where we are free to pursue spiritual right standings. We don't live in a nation that guarantees by virtue of citizenship we are automatically spiritually where we need to be. If that doesn't make sense, let me explain it. This lady was at an advantage. Here's why. She would have never been tempted to look to the law to defend her. She would have never gone to the law and tried to take the law and use it to her advantage. We've seen this before. John chapter 4, the lady at the well. She was a Samaritan, so wrong nationality. She was an outcast in a nation of outcasts. She was like the kid at school that got kicked out of the unpopular crowd. He wasn't even cool enough to hang out with the bottom, right? That was this lady at the well. And Jesus says, yeah, tell your husband. She said, I don't have a husband. Here we go, Jesus again. Jesus said, no, but you used to. You used to, and not just one, huh? You had 5. Oh, and the one that you're living with now, he's not your husband. Doesn't that seem a little harsh again? So let's keep track. So he said, it's not right that the children be fed after the dogs. And yeah, you're not married, but you've been married 5 times, and now you're living with somebody who's not your husband. If you wanted to make the argument that somehow Christianity doesn't take gender equality seriously, you could do it, but you had to misunderstand what's true about the story to do it. You have to ignore the truth in the story to make that argument, because Jesus was not attacking the women. He was defending them. He said, go. And she said, well, here's the problem. I have nothing to present on my own behalf. This lady walked in. She had no rights. She was a foreigner. She was ignoring everything. She said, I got nothing to defend myself. So as Americans, let me tell you, we will assert our rights. We assert our entitlements. But here's the problem. We then take that and we apply it to a spiritual standard. It's natural that we would. Listen, it doesn't make us bad Christians. This is just the natural response. If we appeal to the law at a national level, doesn't it make sense that we would be tempted to appeal to the law at a spiritual level? You go, what does that look like? Here's what it looks like. I do the right thing all the time, and that person gets what I wanted. I try, let's do everything right, do the right, and then do the blowout. I have a blowout. Or about this one. What about, I'm a good guy. Why does this keep happening? Or why do bad things happen to good people? That's what it looks like when people are appealing to the law to advocate for them spiritually. You know what? You know the problem with that? It's like a well. If you think of it like a well. We've got a well driller here. Imagine it this way. The woman at the well, she realizes she met Jesus. So she goes to work and she starts pumping this well. And what she's trying to do is she's trying to bring up something to justify herself. As people, we try to bring up things to prove that we're good people. Or we try to bring up things that we've done good in the past. Or we try to bring up things that prove, oh, wait a minute, I didn't do that one bad thing. Or this one, oh, this one. I'm not a bad guy. Well, the problem is this. When you say, I'm not a bad guy, you've become the accuser. You want me to prove it? You're having to look at people, make a judgment call, and go, I'm better than they are. That's the role of the accuser. You have to become an accuser to defend yourself as being a good guy. This is a fun sermon, isn't it? Because I know all of us are going, I do that. We all do. Because we have a tendency to want to go to the law and present Jesus our goodness. We want to believe that we have the right to ask in times of need, in times where we're desperate, in times where we need something from Jesus. We're tempted to present him with our goodness and hope that it measures up. Hope that we catch him in a good mood. Hope that we've done enough. Hope that we've done enough good versus bad. Hope that when we look around, we're better than the people around us. And we don't realize that the law does not advocate for us. The law accuses us. It is the law by which we are accused. So the well that we're pumping is actually the thing that is killing us. We're not doing ourselves any favors when we try to present our goodness to Jesus as an excuse for why we need what we're asking for. My goodness. You know, when I was a kid, I always thought it was weird, I'll admit, and we're recording, I haven't forgot. Best behavior. We grew up in what would be known as a Pentecostal church. And when I say Pentecostal, I mean Southern. But every now and then the preacher would say something, and it was really, really good. Really, really good. And man, you could just see it in people. You could see it in people, and they would just, yes! I think it's okay when you're sitting in church, and I'm not saying go nuts, in fact, don't, but think of this. The freedom that we could live in as Christians if we could recognize that the law is not what advocates for us, that's Jesus. The law is what accuses us, so we've got to figure out a different method or a different means to access Jesus. And the law won't do it. Problem is this. We're Americans, and if you suggest to an American that they don't deserve something, it's insulting. Try it. Find somebody in town like, you don't deserve your shoes. Tell them anything. You don't deserve that wallet. What? I don't care what it is. Tell an American they don't deserve something. Hello. You'll start a parade. We have been told that we deserve everything. We believe it so much that we believe that we are owed something that doesn't even belong to us, even if it has to be taken from somebody. We're the spoiled rich kids, if you don't know. We are. The U.S., we're the spoiled rich kids. We feel like we deserve everything, so when we hear that Jesus has something to offer, we feel entitled to it. Robs us of our gratitude, doesn't it? Doesn't it cause us to forget that we're following a Jesus that went all out when we didn't deserve it? You can't be grateful. You can't be grateful and entitled. I thought the parents would give me something on that. We'll get back to that. This lady didn't have that. She didn't have any of that. She didn't have any rights. She didn't have any liberties. She was a foreigner. She was a woman at a time where they didn't even have marches with pink hats. It's probably too far. She wasn't the beneficiary of anything. Nothing. She couldn't have. She couldn't have walked in and demanded anything, and she knew it. And it put her at an advantage. Because we walk in and we present Jesus with our goodness. She didn't have that option. She said this. She said, yes, Lord. Here's what I think. I think Jesus knew that she knew. He said what he said, knowing that the Americans would someday be offended by it because we've got all these things going for us. But because we've got all this going for us, it does these little pockets of temptation that we got to at least be aware of. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. Best nation in the world, but it does create some opportunity for temptation. And he knew when he said what he said, the Americans, we were going to be offended, but the Pharisees, they were going to love it. The Pharisees, they were going to go, yeah, finally, I think we about got him converted. I think we almost got Jesus to convert right here because he told the lady, I don't feed dogs before I feed the children. And they're probably amening and whooping and Southern Pentecostal responding to what he had to say because the house was full of them. But Jesus knew that she knew. Jesus knew she wasn't going to be distracted by that. Let me prove it. She said, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Yet, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. See, the story was confusing to us. It wasn't confusing to her. She wasn't confused by it. He said something and everybody else missed it, but she didn't miss it. He knew she wouldn't miss it. She's tracking. She said, yeah, oh, no. I'm not walking in demanding anything. I'm not appealing to you on the law. I'm not coming in with the law on my side. I'm not appealing to you according to your goodness. I'm walking in and I'm appealing to you according to your goodness. I know I don't deserve it. Why was she at an advantage? Because she had a proper context. Her context was laser focused. She had a need and she knew who Jesus was. She said, I'm not appealing to my goodness, I'm appealing to yours. Don't you think that there's just a moment? Can't you almost just see this moment between Jesus and this lady where they're like, these people don't know. He knew she had a need. But he knew he was going to heal the child. He knew he was going to heal the child before he created the child. See, she didn't walk in with a need that he hadn't already seen. He knew. The problem was this. He was surrounded by people who thought they knew. She said, I've got nothing on my side. The Pharisees said, we've got everything on our side. We're the right gender. We're the right nationality. We're from the right place. We say the right words. We have the right education. We've got everything going for us, and Jesus had better line up with us. This lady said, I've got nothing going for me, but I'm not going to be offended. I'm not going to be offended. I've got too much at stake to let offense rob me. Hey, let me tell you something. If you're offended right now, not about anything here. I'm never get offended here. I'm just saying about anything. If you're offended by anything, let me just say, stop it. Just stop it. Just drop it. You're like, what if I'm right? Drop it. What if the person hasn't apologized? Drop it. Because you're playing into the hand of the accuser that will eventually, the accuser that says, I'm better than this person, will eventually, you'll make a mistake and he'll go, see, you're just like everybody else and you're not worth it. The same gun that's pointed at everybody else when we're offended eventually is turned on ourselves. She knew the law. She felt owed nothing. She appealed to the goodness of Jesus. She said, oh, I don't deserve it. I know that, but I'm asking anyway. I'm a mom. I got to ask. See, she went to a different well. She didn't go to the well of the law. She appealed to the love of God. She said, I know you're here for the Israelites first, but my child is sick right now. I know that I don't have the law on my side, but it doesn't matter. I need it now. See, Jesus said, you know that the law is not on your side, right? And she said, yeah. He said, you can go home. Your child's healed. Why? Because it's never been about, is the law wrong? No, it's impossible. The law is not wrong. It's unattainable. So when you go to the law, you're going to the thing that proves you don't deserve it. Couldn't we just skip all that and just know that we didn't deserve it anyway? Because if we could admit we don't deserve it, we could be far more grateful. We could operate in love, and hey, maybe we would be nicer to everybody. Maybe we could start loving people that we disagree with because they're not getting something that oh my goodness, my people, how often do you see somebody else get something you wanted that you were praying for and you feel slighted? That's an accusation. You're saying that you deserved it more than them. It's an accusation. Okay. Mark chapter 12, verse 30 says, love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. Here's what's interesting. You can't command love. I can't come home and tell my kids, I want you to love baseball. Think about that. I can make them play baseball. I can make them practice baseball. I could command religion from them. I could command them to be in church. I could command them to not say cuss words and don't drink this and don't eat that. And we can go through all the rules, but you can't command love. See what he's saying? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. You can't do that unless you get to know him. And you can't get to know him if you're constantly offended with him. And you'll be constantly offended with him when you go to the law and you don't get what you thought you deserved. It's an impossible standard to love God and to cling to offense. Let me ask you something. If she would have gotten offended and left, what did she walk out with? Nothing. But the problem is she walked in with nothing. She just happened to be aware of it. We aren't always aware of that. She was at an advantage because she couldn't appeal to her rights. So what would it have cost her to get offended? It just wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth it to be offended because the law was not on her side. She said, I'm appealing to God's goodness. And like I said, I think if we were there, I think what we would see is that Jesus had a sense of humor. Honestly, I do. Because he's sitting in a room full of people that, law. Oh, what about this law? Oh, yeah, what about that law? Law. And he's just like, ugh. And so this lady comes in and she has no law on her side. Don't you think that Jesus is like, yes, I needed you. I needed you because you don't have the law on your side, and look what I'm going to do anyway. See, the rest of that, verse 31, it follows up with, and the second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. I don't think you can love each other unless you correctly love God. I think you can do a lot. I think you can love each other like a little bit. I think you can love with as much capacity as you've got, but you can't love without accusation unless you come to terms with who God is. It's this. We struggle with this thought that through the law we'll get in. We're battling right now a nation that has gotten very legalistic. And what I mean by that is, oh no, I did the laws, I'm good. I went to Sunday school, I know what the law says, I did it, I'm good. And we believe that it's the law that's going to let us in, when in reality the word says it's the law that was keeping us out. We're appealing to the door that continually stays locked. And it puts us at a disadvantage. The humility to say, oh no. My rights are nothing. My rights didn't gain me anything. My salvation, my life, my opportunities, everything that God's given me is a gift. Everything that God's given me I didn't deserve. Can you imagine with the countenance of Christianity how much different it would look? The danger right now is that the Christian faith nationally is just entitled, or it's angry, or it's frustrated, and we demand. And how could we be that way if we were full of gratitude? How could the church get to that point if it was grateful? I don't think it could. I think that when we become grateful, we become alive. And we become viable, and we become an opportunity to reach out to people and say, hey, gender equality, that's ours. Our guy started that. We're 100% in support of that. Loving people better than we love them now, yes, that's us. That's what we're looking for. Compassion should be our job. We should not look to the law. The whole nother sermon here. When you look to the law to solve the problems, someone gets excluded. It is not the job of the law that everyone be equal and loved. That's on us, and we can't get there when we're so busy accusing everybody so that we feel superior, so that we can feel entitled. It says that the enemy is the accuser, the Holy Spirit. He comes in, he guides us to truth. My thought is this: why don't we dive all the way into the Word and figure out what's there and see if maybe rather than being the accuser, that our advocate with the Father, that Jesus is up there, and instead of keeping records of wrongs and all these things that we do, are we doing enough? Are we doing good? Are we doing bad? All of a sudden, the countenance of our walk would change. We look more like the lady that goes, offended. What am I going to be offended about? Everything he's saying is right. I don't have any law on my side. I don't have any rights. What am I going to be offended about? Why would I want to be offended? I'm not appealing to him according to my goodness. We come to Jesus, and we appeal to Jesus according to his goodness. Let's pray. Lord, just like the woman at the well, there have been times I've read that story and thought, man, that just seems harsh. That just seems like you just sort of ripped the Band-Aid off. But God, what you were challenging her with is don't go to the law. Why would you? Why do any of us feel owed? Oh, it's so hard to get over the idea that we don't deserve something. We want to believe that we deserve everything. That God's salvation was a gift that was freely given, but it doesn't stop there. God, our day-to-day lives, you've got so much better for us than we have for ourselves, but it's like we hold that at bay because we're good. We did enough. We've done enough. God, I get excited thinking what would happen to the American church if we just got a glimpse of how good you are, of how much you love us. The fact that we don't win when we start to accuse each other. We win when we start to build each other up. We start loving people. We start encouraging people. We start acting more like an advocate than an accuser. And that God, that we get over that hurdle that says somehow, some way we are going to earn our way in. It doesn't work. The law doesn't let us in. The law keeps us out. We appeal to your goodness that says you loved us when we were unlovable. You can look up for a second, just for a second. Here's what I'm going to challenge us with. Everybody's got that one thing. Some of us have lots of things, but everybody's got at least one. We've got that one sin. We've got that one thing that when we start thinking about God loving us, there's that, but that one thing. Maybe it's repetitive. Maybe it's a habit. Maybe it was a one-time thing. Whatever the case may be. The enemy loves the fact that you've got that one thing. Because it's right as you start to come out of your shell and think, I'm going to go for it. It's like, but wait. You know the worst one things are those one things where there was witnesses. Oh, those are the worst. Hey, young people growing up in the age of cameras, praying for you. But what if? We remember that the law only brought death anyway. That one thing that won't allow you to feel good is not what disqualifies you anyway. Nothing but Jesus qualifies you. When you think of that lady saying, I have no rights, they weren't going to work anyway. I'm at an advantage because I'm not even tempted to go grab them. What if that one thing became the catalyst? I'm just saying what if. What if your one thing, what if that one thing that's constantly nagging you became the catalyst that reminded you the law didn't work anyway? Imagine where you could go. Imagine what God could do in your life. Let's pray. I'm going to have Robert head this way. Lord, thank you for who you are. God, thank you for who you are, but thank you for who we get to be because of who you are. You could have been anything, but you chose us. You loved us. You gave it as a free gift. God, we don't walk in with our heads up. We walk in appealing to your goodness, not our own. Help us to take that and put it to practice this week. Pray in Jesus' name, amen.